What's up, everybody? This is Manny Bothans, and you are listening to the Manny Bothans' Primary Podcast, now with 100% more people. I am so sorry that there wasn't a show last week, guys. I guess the 4th of July weekend was just too hard a call for everyone to resist, because I sat here in the Mumble server by myself for about an hour, and, well, we didn't have a show. Sorry about that, guys. It's really hard to do by myself, which is why Jay here is a fucking miracle worker. When we get through intros, you'll realize why. Speaking of intros, let's go ahead and start with those right off at the top. That would make it your turn, Dirk.
Hey, what's up? It's Dirk McGurk, low-level member of Sniggeredly and Pandemic Legion and co-host of the Open Com Show.
Awesome. And the hero himself, Jay.
Jay Maricotti, U.S. Diplo at Jemico, and General Miner.
Hey, we love miners. We gotta have more of them. Pro.
Pro God Legend, Test FC.
Awesome. Robbie.
Robbie Kasperick, just like random line person from Karma Fleet, and also a writer for INN. I mostly just fly ships and do very, very bad job at it.
Oh, wow. Somebody's taking my shtick. I see how it is. Tark.
Tarquinius, I'm the FCON CEO. I delegate and never log in.
A Matani in training. And Urziel.
That's the way to do it, my friend.
Version 99 with Multiplex Gaming, part of Bastion.
And Urziel sounds good, as that's his sound check. Awesome.
I mysteriously did not hear you until like a minute ago when I saw you start recording. I don't know. I keyed up and didn't say anything, and then all of a sudden now I can hear you.
Well, it's good that you can hear us now. And the impressive list of people who are here on the show, I have to thank Jay Maricotti. He is a fucking amazing dude. If you want the position as co-host, it's yours. But with all that said, we are going to have an awesome show for you tonight. I love it when I have lots of guests. It means I can be slightly lazy. But I do want to start off with the first topic of discussion. The new event that's coming out with the next patch. Have you guys seen the video that Seagull put out?
No.
By new event, do you mean the Tech 3 Cruiser rebalance, or the thing that's coming out on the 18th?
The thing that's coming out on the 18th, the agency.
What is the agency?
Do you remember when the Scope was doing that event where you had little quests that popped up and you would get rewards for however many you did?
No. Is that a thing?
That was a thing. There was a daily quest system that the Scope got behind. Concord kind of made them do it, and basically it was simple things, like take out a pirate anomaly, or kill X number of pirates, or mine X amount of ore, or shit like that.
Wasn't one of those the one where they had like kill 20 drifters in a day?
Oh
Yep,
yeah,
that was the event.
kill 20 drifters and shit like that. Well, it's coming back. It's going to be called the Agency, and there was an awesome review video done from the test server by DeLone Wolf. He basically did like 4 out of 5 in less than an hour, because a lot of these quests will tie into each other. Like kill X number of pirates can also be done while doing a pirate combat anomaly, while doing it in a T3 cruiser.
So that's going to make a lot of ISK.
It's going to make a bit of Plex. I believe the prizes are Plex.
Well, some of them are. So basically, it is a series of dailies that you can run. That once you run one of these things, there begins a 24-hour timer on being able to run that thing again. There are some mission rewards that apparently you get for doing it, but then there are also these points that you get. And as the points go up, I think it's by like 20 per level or something like that. At each level, there's this other reward that you can get. And what it showed on the test server was that basically every other one of these was some number of Plex or Plex bits, or however you want to call it nowadays. Other things were like skins and shit like that. So the more of these you run over time, the more points you accrue, the higher up the level it goes.
I think it works out to you almost get a full plex, or the equivalent of old plex, by doing them for a month, right?
Well, they didn't. Okay, so my understanding of one of the things that they did out on the test server was they advanced how quickly the point levels were, I think, because they wanted to make sure that those things were working. So it may be that it takes more points than what it actually takes on the test server to accrue these things. And it really wasn't saying how many plex you got out there either, from what I recall seeing on DeLone Wolf's review. But yeah, this is a new one of those, PvE kind of things they're putting in.
It's WoW dailies.
Well, at least it wasn't that. What were the first dailies that they came out with? Like 10,000 SP a day or something.
Yeah, go kill one rat in like anything. It didn't matter what you did, and then you got like 10k skill points on that character, which was really nice for me because I was able to finish off.
Kill X number of rats in a rookie ship. That shit was hilarious.
It was almost a skill injector a month extra.
Yeah, they only ran it for like a month though.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, they did it just long enough for me to finish training small hybrid turrets when it was something I really didn't want to touch, and so I got it done. Woohoo!
Yay! Now I can fit T2 guns on my gank lists.
Or more aptly fit, Tech 2 guns on my travel scepters, but yeah.
I mean, the thing that is coming out on Amazon Prime Day is the new Project Discovery. I mean, that is the other kind of...
Oh, I am looking forward to this.
I just hope I can hoard my whatever the reward stuff is so I can save it for our Marshall blueprint when those finally start coming out.
I liked the idea that Project Discovery had when they first started, citizen science, and they were doing some good work, the human protein map, but I'm not really that big into biology. I'm more of an astronomy fan, so this is just right up my fucking alley. This is going to be amazing. I'm probably going to grind Project Discovery nonstop for months on end. Hopefully they name a planet after me.
Yeah, I'm assuming it does speak better to the audience of Eve. A little more sci-fi.
Well, I mean, even the biology project can get a little sci-fi-ish. Maybe they're trying to identify the proteins involved in drifter drug manufacturing.
I think that was part of the role, like the RP side of that event, was they were looking into something to do with drifters.
They were looking into something to do with drifters, and the rewards were drifter drugs.
I'm kind of sad that those are going away from easy procurement, because having those be really cheap was nice, so I hope they keep an easy and quick way of getting them around.
Well, I don't know about easy and quick, but I mean, you can still get them to drop.
This Project Discovery stuff's going to get tied into the new sovereignty system when that comes out.
Oh,
instead
God.
of Intosis links, you have to find like alien life forms or something.
God.
Discover X amount of exoplanets before the reinforcement timer ends.
I actually ignore most things on Reddit, but there was a post about putting solar arrays around stars. Did you see that?
What would they do?
Eve or real?
No, but I'm just saying, like, as far as it actually being a somewhat decent idea.
Are you sure you didn't just run into something on Dyson spheres?
Yeah, it was the solar arrays, Dyson spheres on the stars.
Oh yeah, Dyson sphere.
I just know how much of a pain they are to build in Stellaris.
Aw, the executioner ran away from me. Sad face.
I would say come down towards Delve and I'll give you a fight, but I have something a little bigger than what you're in right now.
Yeah, no, I like to traipse around lowsec while I'm doing a show because it's fun to fight people while listening to folks talk. And he ran away from the fucking site too.
You're the host, not a listener.
Well, I try to keep up with the discussion as long as I'm not getting shot at. And EVE Online is just like flying a fighter jet. 5 minutes of terror, 5 hours of boredom.
See, what you need to do is roam around lowsec in like a Fanny or a Nidhogger.
Hey, you want to inject me up to a fucking Fanny or a Nidhogger, feel free to. I thought these...
Let's talk after the show.
Because natural phenomena are disrupting the ship. You cannot warp there because
What the
natural
fuck?
phenomena are disrupting
Well, since it was brought up and that these missions are going to have things that do use a lot of T3s in them and such, I guess it's kind of a nice segue into the T3 changes and what that's all going to mean.
It was all according to my evil plan.
I'm actually, I'm a pretty big fan of them, to be honest. I think it puts T3s in a good spot, and they're not low sig enough anymore to get under the guns of battleships, which means the fact that they have near battleship EHP isn't a big enough that big of a deal because they don't have fucking, sorry, someone else is trying to talk over me. They don't have I lost my fucking train of thought. They don't have more EHP than battleships. That's it. My bad.
Go have a drink.
I mean, I definitely really like what I'm seeing from them so far, and obviously I don't have ProGod's perspective on a lot of things, but just it seems to me like they're almost gaining flexibility here in compared to the old system. Just because you have more things consolidated down into a fewer number of subs, you can almost specialize them more without making stuff that's just super gimmicky.
I mean, there was no specialization in the past. Like, you couldn't, once you put rigs on it, it was what it was. And I know what you're saying with the less components, but like there were only 1 or 2 viable components in each category anyway. So at least they all are decent now.
Yeah, like before, you'd get, if you were trying to do something that was more like like more PvE oriented, you always had to carry additional subsystems around with you. But now you have a choice as to whether or not you want to use the ones that give you the biggest advantage in a given category, or ones that don't give you quite as big of that advantage but give you some additional utility on top of that. Like how they've smashed together or smashed covert into defensive and given it some active tanking bonuses. I think that really makes it cool and viable to use in a combat scenario outside of something like Pete's.
Oh yeah, I definitely like that.
I mean, go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Well, it's saying, okay, go.
Yeah, no, all right. It's just the covert system before wasn't really that great. I don't mind having it active. It's still not as strong as the other defensive system as far as pure EHP or pure defensive bonuses are. So it's just giving the covert something that makes it not suck, not making the covert like a jack of all trades.
Well, the thing I like about it is each T3 is going to be, have a viable 1000 DPS fit,
I mean, yeah, I haven't looked at it in that way. That shows you how much I just focus on fleet stuff. I didn't even know that. I just look at fleet fits.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going to go there, is that, given the kind of the crowd that's here, I don't know that anybody here, a real small gang guy or anything like that. They're all coming from kind of sizable organizations. How do you, ProGod, see this changing the existing meta out there, for these larger groups and the types of fleets that they have tended to put together? And then, well, let's cover that first, I guess.
I honestly don't think it's going to be that big of a change to the large fleet meta at all. Like, I wouldn't use these over any of the current large fleets, like battleships or anything like that. Because, like I said, it's got the same EHP as a battleship, but they're both a T1 battleship fleet would track these just as well as the T3s are obviously going to be tracking the battleships, but cost 3 times as much. So why would I use a T3 fleet when I can just use a battleship fleet, essentially?
Well, and beyond that, with the changes of
However, I think
Second.
the overheating mechanics is going to make these things just a beast in small gangs and medium gangs. Like, I don't see any reason, if my fleet is less than 50 people in it, I don't see any reason to not be using T3s as the mainstay of your fleet. And you can use everything. I mean, this opens up medium gang roaming again, 40 to 60 people, because the overheat mechanic allows you to force multiply in ways that other fleets can't. So I think that's a part of the game that's been dead for a long time. The medium gangs, like 40 to 70 people. Really, Muck is the only one doing those successfully, other than a couple other groups. This kind of opens it up again. I can take a T3 fleets with like 7 or 8 T3 Logi, 30 T3 DPS, some shield, Lokis for webs, some Proteuses for points, and really do some nasty shit with it. So it's something I'm looking forward to.
Do you see any real benefit from the hot swap ability for rigs?
Absolutely. I mean, the hot swap, it allows you to technically do the multiple, so what I just talked about. You could bring a fleet that has T3 Logi in it, T3 Tackle, 3 DPS, T3, boosting. Now you only need one hole. You bring the extra rigs, you bring all the modules, and you can do a pretty quick deployment with that. And you can also, for a medium gang, a group of like 400, 500 people that puts 50-man fleets together, they could throw all their T3s in probably 3 jump freighters, repackage all of them, rigs and everything, and they can move around all over the place.
Well, like you were saying, a medium gang, now you could actually kill a Rorqual relatively easily.
Yeah, that too. I think the biggest problem with the reason roaming died was that, back in 2006, 2007, Pandemic Legion would take a gang of like 40 sniper hacks into Providence and just pick on people who had no idea how to play the fucking game. And now the game's so old and documentation for it's so widespread, and there's just so many players that are veterans. You just can't take a 50-man fleet into someone's space anymore and get 150 kills, like wiping out 3 fleets that respond to you. No one does that. They either blob you or they fucking fight. Don't fight.
Well, shit. Even renters are going to drop 20 supers on your little roam and ruin your day.
Well, yeah, so what these open up, if I take a fleet of 50 of these things, I can tank 150 people with the right fit and the right pilots. And that means if someone responds to me with a blob, I can fight them. But they don't scale well because of the SIG and the EHP. So it's a really unique spot that they fill right now.
How does the change in SIG radius affect their susceptibility to bombs?
They're basically battle cruisers with 180k EHP or less, depending on which hole you're using. They're basically battle cruisers. So imagine trying to bomb a Sleipnir fleet. It takes about 3 waves. These would take about 3 or 4, unless they're the Lokis or the Legions, and then they take about 5 or 6.
Well, it works out to what, 40 bombs or something.
Yeah, I mean, a very large, like war-size bombing fleet could definitely wipe one of these T3 fleets out, but that would be.
Oh boy!
Here's a question.
Moving fast too.
Has anyone been testing these on the test server? I'm curious. What's the limitations on mobile depot refitting for them? Can you swap everything, including the rigs, in the mobile depots with these?
Yep. You can literally and they have a cargo for the systems and all that shit. So like, you can literally just get in your T3 and like just be a U-boat and freaking hunt for days.
Holy shit!
Cargo base.
Sorry to interrupt, guys. I just finished a fight in lowsec. This dude had a pithy C-type shield booster on him.
Nice.
A medium shield booster.
Did it drop?
Fuck yeah, it dropped. Republic Fleet small cap battery. Fucking nice shit here.
Very nice, very nice. But yeah, I think the subsystems bay really speaks to what CCP wants these ships to be capable of, along with the rig swapping. I've heard the argument that even with swappable rigs, you still want to have an individual hull for each purpose. Well, yeah, sure. Back in your stager, you should absolutely have, like a Logi Legion, paint Newt Legion, a DPS Legion. You could have all those, but being able to just pack up enough stuff to where, like ProGod's saying, you can take 30, 40, 50 dudes and say, okay, we're going to go off into middle of nowhere compared to where we live for 2-3 weeks, you now get a lot more flexibility with that, where before it was really kind of difficult to do that without having to bring along like a carrier or something that you could have additional ships in. With this, it's okay, you can get out here anytime you want because, oh look, you can fit probes, you can do all that sort of stuff. You can do, we have people who can swap around between various roles as needed. So if you come out in a Logi ship, but we need something that, we need an additional Weber, and you're in a Logi Loki, sure, you can refit to the webbing Loki easy. I think what ProGod's getting at is part of what CCP wants to try and do here, but also extending that flexibility to just be like, you can just kind of go get lost somewhere and have all the tools you need to do whatever it is you want to do. I think that's going to be a really cool feature of these ships.
Well, I think it's going to make hunters' lives just, and solo guys just, amazing.
Now, for those organizations, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say what he was just talking about with the ability to change roles mid-fleet would be pretty big for large fleets as well. I mean, just the tactical ability to send off a squad and say, hey, we lost our Logi, you're now Logi, go refit yourselves at a mobile depot, fly back in, let's get back into the fight. That's pretty big itself. Have a fully reswappable ship.
Well, the problem I see with doing that in a large fleet fight scenario is it's just harder to coordinate. I don't necessarily see this as a benefit during fights, but more as during hey, we're going and camping, somebody on the other end of the map for 2 weeks. Everybody make sure you have all the mods for all the different fits we could use in your cargo. So that way, before we go out, I could, if I were FCing this group and I could say, okay, we've only got 4 Logi ships that are already here. Can I get you and you to refit to Logi? Rather than try and do that in the middle of a fight, I think it just changes the flexibility equation when you have a small number of people going away from a staging area to do something.
Well, I think the other thing that really hasn't been hit on really big is if you actually go on the test server and screw around the Logi, the T3 Logi, so the SIG is a little bigger, yada, 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 but it's still a battleship Logi ship. Essentially. It's...
It's a battleship Logi with battleship SIG, though, and more importantly, its only bonuses are to medium reps. So,
it puts out.
They're good. I know they're good. They're not, overtly better than Logi rep power-wise. They're just slightly better. It does beat it on errors. It did before the changes, man. Which is another common theme we've been going over with these T3 changes. Is people are like, well, these are really good. And I'm like, yeah, but the previous fit was much better. It's actually a downgrade.
I'm not sure about
the current Logi T3s, other than the fact that they don't have great range, are really fucking good. These fix the range problems while slightly downgrading some other things.
Wait, was there I'm sorry, I'm new to flying T3s. I got my Web Loki. That's pretty much it. But was there previously a Logi configuration for T3 cruisers?
Yeah, you could do Logi, and a lot of people use it for tanker tank setups.
Where I've seen it used a lot is in Black Ops gangs, because you could before, and I think you still can run it as you can put the covert subsystem on, so you can still take a covert jump bridge, but also have the Logi subsystem, so you could bring them along if you were dropping other T3s or Black Ops battleships themselves. You could bring them as the Logi component to that.
Yeah, one of the nastiest setups I saw was Goons used to do it, where they'd have a bunch of Sims and then some T3 Logi, and that was nasty. Back in the old bot days, they used to go just rape runners.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what the Muck Barovians of the game come up with for these T3 fleets, man. I really can't wait to see some 50, 60-man gangs of just brutally efficient, high resist with the overheat mechanic. You can really just tank a shit ton of damage. It's just going to be interesting.
Well, and I think they're also going to reward skill.
Yeah, no, definitely. And they scale the scaling problem. The overheat mechanic is really good for the scaling problem because it really stops being so effective the larger the fight gets. The fact that you can overheat your hardener on the next cycle, keep in mind it's the next cycle, doesn't really stop me from volleying you. But it does stop me from killing you over time with damage, which is what medium gangs fights are more like.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what, the small elite groups do,
Yes, I am personally interested in what exactly the Inner Hell Protei are going to look like when they nuke some AFK roll call.
Oh god, I would love to be a fucking cloaked up ship on that grid.
There's been a couple of times where it's just been like, wait, what do you mean you're tackled? You've known there were the T3s pouring out of that wormhole for 20 minutes.
Well, and Rooks are so overpowered now. I mean, I got jumped by a gang of like 15 not too long ago, and just sat there and laughed at them while I multi-box carriers and almost killed them all. So.
But yeah, T3s are gonna be very interesting. Like, I was never thinking of doing a solo T3 or something before, and I've been playing around with a couple of fits. Like, ooh, this could be fun. So
do any of these changes kind of change the gripe out there that has been around for a while that these ships have displaced certain, let's just say hacks, other ship classes out there, especially for those organizations where really, cost is of no concern.
So I thought a lot about hacks placement after this, and they still kind of get in the way of a lot of. They still kind of overlap hacks a lot. I don't honestly think hacks are in a good spot still, but T3s now have a niche with these changes with the overheat mechanic, and I think they're a medium gang niche. I think if we get that, opens the option to do something with hacks that would differentiate them, but as they are currently, they're not much different than T3s. I mean, T3s even have the MWD sig reduction bonus if you fit that mod or that subsystem.
Well, imagine if you had five 50-man fleets, you could just devastate a region.
Well, also just to kind of look at hacks, I think one thing with hacks that gets overlooked a lot is they get really specialized into some specific roles. Like, you still see Serb fleets doing a very specific thing, and I've never seen a Tengu fit that could kind of match what that Serb fit does.
Serb's always been the one hack though that has held out in these recent times.
Well, what I'm getting at with this is that I think there's room to have the other hacks kind of come into either through balance changes or meta changes of the balance changes would probably be essential to doing this. Come into sort of that similar role or similar dichotomy between the Tengu and the Cerberus, where if you're trying to do something really specific,
there's room for roles. We just have to make those changes. They're just not there right now. But I definitely think there's a role for the hack to occupy that without overlapping with the T3.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the T3 should be, almost as good as the hack, but the hack, if you want a specialized role, should be the best, in my opinion.
Well, no, there's nothing wrong with the T3s being better than hacks. They just need to occupy different roles.
Well, with the overheat mechanics, don't you think that encourages the T3s to be more hands-on than perhaps a hack would be, where a hack can outperform a T3 if the hack is just being piloted, like, let's say, by an F1 pilot, but T3 should outperform a hack. It seems to be pointing in that direction with the overheat mechanics. If the pilot is very skilled and able to actively, pilot their ship, fight the fight, and make modifications to what their ship's doing constantly.
Well, I think some of this is, or hold on, let me back up here. With what you're talking about there, with that skill ceiling thing, I think there is a difference there. But when we're talking about how the hacks and T3s in an ideal world should compare, I think the Cerberus and Tengu are very good ones to look at. Where, you see the Tengu for a long time having these roles that it fills within, within like a heavy missile launcher is my weapon of choice scenario, where you can get close to what the Serb does, but the Serb is better in some crucial areas that make it more viable. I'd almost say you'd want to look at something like, maybe a better example in the small gang area would be like the Proteus versus the Deimos, in that the Deimos is probably a little better at doing some specific things within that niche than the Proteus is, but just the fact that you get more flexibility out of the Proteus means if you're not doing that exclusive task, you're going to want to fly a Proteus. And I think that's kind of where the other hacks need to be adjusted, so you can get a similar dichotomy between, I want to do one thing, and I want to do one thing the best I possibly can, being where the T3s and the hacks sit respectively. If that makes any sense.
See, I think the changes are more in relation to the direction that CCP wants to go with the sob system, to be frank. I think they want the sob system to be a function of small and medium gangs, and that's why they're making the changes to T3, in my opinion.
Warp drive active.
I don't know, man. That's a far reach. I don't think they even know where they want the sob system to go at the moment.
Well, let me rephrase that. I think they know where it wants to go. I mean, they've been saying it for years, right? They want small and independent entities to be able to realistically hold up against a larger group like Imperium or Gemco or Phoenix Federation, whatever, right? But, that hasn't really happened.
I would disagree that's their motivation. I think they wanted smaller groups to be able to participate in sovereignty warfare, where there was a higher barrier to entry, even to attacking it, let alone holding it from somebody else. But I don't know that they can ever build anything that can have smaller entities be able to go head to head with the big guys on either side of it. But at least they can get involved and participate, even if it's from a guerrilla warfare kind of perspective in this. Whereas guerrilla warfare really didn't exist in the Old Dominion zone.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, if you have a couple guys, a small alliance, they can effectively wage war against a larger entity with 50 or 60 of these things. I mean, you're gonna have to form up a serious fleet to deal with them, right? And you're going to have to respond. They're going to force a response because 50 or 60 of these guys can shut down an area.
So what you're getting at, Jay, just to try and sum this up in a different way here. Yeah, I sound like tech support. That's what I am. To sum this up in a different way, you're thinking that by introducing these ships that allow for the major flexibility, things like we were talking about earlier, like you don't necessarily need, everybody from your small gang to be there in the ships that they brought. You can have that, have that flexibility to switch around. That you're then you're basically expanding the skill ceiling to where a small group compete against a larger one on a limited grid engagement.
Yeah, so we all, we get 50, 60 dudes and we go into some region and we start hitting, a pocket in the back region. In order for them to deal with us, they're going to have to do a major form-up. And even if they do, they're gonna have it's gonna be a nasty fight. I mean, these things are, 60 dudes, you're doing 80,000 DPS. Holy crap!
I would counter that with, I think that would work against large footprint entities or entities that really don't have a way to quickly mass their forces to get somewhere.
What, like the Imperium?
Imperium pre-World War B or whatever it is we're calling it now, I would definitely say falls in that category of where we were just so spread out beforehand that by the time everybody kind of got together to form the apex force that we supposedly had, it was far too late to use it. Where I think this would be less effective is against those entities that are already very compact and already able to sort of go, okay, we know what we can control based on where we live. Like, say a smaller group living in a single constellation in the middle of a fountain or something. They would have the control necessary to sort of say, hey, we don't really need to expand more. If somebody goes and tries to fight a smaller group like that, I don't think you're going to see these being as effective as you'd like them to. I think they're going to work better against entities that are too small for the amount of space they occupy.
See, I kind of disagree. So let's use an example here strategically, right? So if you had, let's say, 4 or 5 groups of 50 dudes, you would either have to form up the equivalent of 1,000-man fleet to deal with them, right? You're going to have to, essentially field, 4 or 5 full fleets almost to deal with these things. Or you're going to have, a lot of highly skilled pilots, right? Which most of the larger blocks don't have, right? They're almost all F1 pilots, right? So you see what I'm saying? Like, 100 dudes in Macarials are going to get shredded up by these guys, easily.
I mean, I don't think you're incorrect, but I think you're making some assumptions there about how these sort of fights would go. And I'm not saying that those assumptions are incorrect, just that we don't have, conclusive combat evidence of how well these things work, because there's a difference between how they look on paper and how they're actually going to perform in real life. I would almost say that what you're describing is going to depend a hell of a lot more on the relative skill level of the FCs more than it is on the ships themselves in that particular scenario.
Well, my point there was it depends on the relative skills of the pilots in the fleets. So, and obviously it doesn't, we have no idea what it's going to shake out to be until it actually hits and, the metas develop and so on and so forth. But if it even changes the meta, like ProGod said. But I can see the intent. The intent is, 40 or 50 dudes can, rain hell on a 150-man fleet if they know what they're doing. Plus, you're able to move around. Black Ops, freaking nullified. I mean, you know what I mean? You can do a lot of damage. A lot of guerrilla warfare options, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it would force a disproportionate response, I guess is what I'm really trying to get at.
Yeah, and again, I don't think you're wrong. I'm just, I'm wondering again from the I have never FC'd T3s in my life. I have never FC'd, anything big, anything bigger than like a cruiser before. I'm wondering if, that disproportional response is going to hit these a lot harder, especially now that you have the increase in SIG radius, all that sort of stuff. Is that going to mean that capital forces are going to be more effective a response against these than they would have been before in terms of what you're talking about, Jay?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, there's three types of pilots, right? There's skilled small gangs people, there's F1, and then there's, capital pilots. Black Ops is also in there, but this is going to require, a lot of a lot of F1 guys, an equal or, greater force of the skilled T3 pilots, or a, decent capital fleet.
I guess my argument would be that most of the entities you see with these very condensed footprints are going to be able to mass. And the reason I'm saying the condensed footprint here is they're able to mass that sort of capital force that would just make these things a non-starter in some ways.
Thanks for the follow. Thanks for the follow, Vibe.
My whole point I was trying to make is you have a fleet of 250 of these pilots. You split them up into 5 fleets. Now they've got to respond with 5 separate capital fleets, or these guys are shredding things up and causing massive damage. Does that make sense?
Yes, which then to further take this argument off into the distant weeds, what is to stop then the entity in question from saying, okay, we're going to let them hack, say 3 of these 5 structures they're going after, but we're just going to absolutely murder every single ship in 2 of these fleets. If you're talking about an entity that's deployed from across the galaxy, getting all those ships back is going to be more difficult. You can sort of deal with them piecemeal. I think splitting up, I don't think it's going to be as effective as it appears to be on paper at this point. I still think you're also. Sorry. I still think you're going to see the assembling the Apex Force altogether be something that is done. I just don't see this being the thing that forces fights to disperse to multiple grids.
But see, the thing about it is, and I think you're underestimating maybe, is the ability, at least, as far as they are right now, for them to be able to disengage wills, right? So you bring your Apex Force against the 2 fleets, they just disengage and dance all around you.
Docking request denied.
Anyway, I think we've gone far enough off into assumption land here that we're just going to start throwing scenarios at each other like, well, what if Germany did this on the Russian front? We're heading towards that territory very quickly here. So I'll divert us from there and say, I think what you're making is a lot of valid points. I think, there are some valid, things that could come up within that as issues. But really, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens when they actually hit the live server and get in the hands of not only people who aren't intimately involved in testing things, like clearly Pro God Legend is, but also into the hands of pilots that may not necessarily know what they're doing with them too. And, that's when I think we're really going to see how these are going to shake out.
Yeah, I think it has the potential to be cool. We'll see.
Agree with you on that one.
You got to oil the hinges on those doors that I keep hearing opening.
Oh shit! Sorry.
It sounds like a creepy Halloween house.
I bought some WD-40. I just need to get around to it.
I was going to say we're getting close to a. That thought just left my head.
But one of the other things that came out in the last few days is the video postcard from Seagull, where she opened up first by acknowledging, I think, the underlying issues that were sort of a bit of foundational problems or whatever leading into the late spring of mild discontent that then allowed some of those other flare-ups to kind of take on more of a life of their own than they probably would have. The first thing that she talked about was a dedicated team for balance for ships and mods. What's everybody thinking about that?
I think it's going to be nice, but I also hope that it doesn't become something where they're trying to chase things around like, say a MOBA would. Not trying to say, well, this ship's really popular, we must nerf it. So I hope it's definitely something that works to balance create a whole ecosystem rather than just sort of prune the edges of the ecosystem.
Which has tended to be the problem all the way along, whether they had a dedicated team or not, right? Is that by the time they get done balancing a class of ships or even individual ships, right, and then move on to something else that requires it, by the time they get back around again, things have fallen out of balance once again, right? I mean, is a dedicated team going to look at these things more holistically, given the fact that there are a lot of damn ships out there and a lot of ship classes in a game that is as old as it is, with new players coming in and old players, and have balance from a single ship perspective all the way up to mass fleets. I mean, balancing in this is a long-term, forever project. It's just always going to go on.
Yeah, no disagreement on that front. One thing I think that you can sort of see where, at least if I were the person in charge of this project, I would start is really trying to make sure that you're divorcing different categories, and not necessarily divorcing the different categories you're talking about as in the the ships that are more geared towards solo work, the ships that are more geared towards large fleet work, and just sort of saying, what, we realize that for instance a Cyclone is never going to be something that competes as a fleet ship because of the bonuses it has. However, the Cyclone, just example here, is not sitting at a good place in the role that its bonus is pointed towards. So we're going to adjust the Cyclone with the idea of making it a better small gang or solo ship, not really, and just sort of eliminating the fact that this is never going to be a fleet ship at all. I think that does compartmentalize these things into more manageable chunks than just sort of saying, we need to make sure every ship can do everything.
Warp drive active.
I think the issue that first popped in my mind when I saw that they were going to have a specialized group for it was, are they going to worry about why something should be balanced instead of if it can be balanced? Because you get that analogy of if all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. Would a team solely dedicated to balancing start going off of the things that need to be balanced, the things that are critical to be balanced, to looking at how can we balance every single thing in the game, whether or not it needs it?
But I don't think, I don't care how many focus groups they put together or anything else. They've got to take a serious look at their decision-making process, because, I mean, everybody knew Tier 3 destroyers were broken as fuck for how long? And they didn't start working on it for quite a while.
Well, I think some of that comes from an organizational thing of, the EVE community, the parts of it that are vocal tend to be very, very vocal. And not saying that they are wrong at any given time, but I can see where the hesitation would come from as to the, this is a ship that hasn't been seen before. This is something that people are looking at and going, oh my God, it's going to break everything. What's the worst that could happen? I see that sort of coming out in the process. But then you're right. I think it takes them too long to realize, oh, wait, these guys actually kind of know what they're talking about, and we need to make some adjustments. I don't think they have to make adjustments based on somebody going at the introduction like, oh my God, there's going to be so overpowered. But I think they need to be quicker on the uptake for making changes after something is introduced, if that makes sense.
Incremental rebalancing as opposed to let's revisit that ship class or that ship sometime down the road when we do a complete rebalance of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Ishtars, right? Everybody knew Ishtars were broken, the drones, right? They could have tweaked them, right? They could have just, I don't know, however you want to do it, but decrease the amount of damage they did, right? And see how it went. But no, they waited how long to fix that? And then it was like, 3 or 4 Nerf bats in a row in like a month?
Well, they were really trying to incrementally adjust that. And honestly, I don't think that's the wrong course of action because...
No, I don't either. But what I'm saying is they need to do that quicker to the, and they need to, maybe spread it out a little more. I mean, there should be constant tweaks coming. You look at any like major development cycle in any major studio. Let's look at Diablo, right? Find me a patch, that came out, minor, major, whatever, where there isn't a class being tweaked, an armor being tweaked, a ability being tweaked, right? I mean, it's a constant process, and you just don't see that from CCP, except in these big bursts, every 6 months when everybody gets pissed off about something.
Well, it tends to be extremely reactionary to something that has gotten out of control, right?
Exactly. Like Diablo, for a while, Wizards were like so overpowered it wasn't even funny, but it was like for a month, right? And people, they were broken, and people, didn't even really get a chance to bitch yet, and they'd already started to fix it. It took them a while, but they started addressing the issue very, very quickly.
Well, I think part of the difference between the Diablo scenario you were talking about before and CCP's end is ignoring that skill injectors exist for a moment, which I know that's another can of worms that we could probably talk about for hours. But ignoring that skill injectors are a thing. In EVE, you have real-time barriers to how long it takes you to get into something, be it hacks in general, the Ishtar specifically, Sleipnir's, whatever that flavor of the month happens to be, there's going to be a portion of the player base that just can't use that ship at that given time. And when a given ship gets elevated to that portion of popularity, I think you see a lot of people start chasing it. So what I think CCP's concern is there with making adjustments smaller and more granular and more spaced out with time to gather data between them is that they're wary of the fact that if they're making all these constant little changes where you're constantly seeing a reshuffling of what is the best chip, you're going to increase the gulf between lower skill players and higher skill players who just sort of go, okay, we're using low keys this week instead of Sleipnir's. Okay, I can do that. Where somebody who's brand new, who's just finished training the requirements for command ships, goes, well, now I have to go do all this other stuff. I think CCP is very wary of increasing that gap, whereas in something like Diablo, you don't really have that fixed time gap between when you can cycle through things, if that makes sense. Like, yeah.
I get what you're saying. I mean, skill injectors aside, I mean, you could always buy another character, right? I mean, there's always been a way to get what you need. I mean, but I mean, look at some of the best examples, like the Ishtar. I mean, how long was the Ishtar broken?
I wasn't really actively participating in anything when that was going on. I heard of it tangentially, but I had yet to make the journey from L4 mission running to something fun.
Well, I mean, how long was it broken? It was technically broken for a long time, right? It didn't exhibit just how broken it could be until it started being used in mass, in conjunction with Sentry Drone Assist, in conjunction with all kinds of stuff that came about over time, right?
Yeah, but that was going on for years, though. I mean, that was not like
but not on that scale that it ultimately got to.
Yeah, I mean, HRT fleets were, primary doctrine for most groups for years.
But at any case, I think the issue highlighted here is that the balance team has to, pun incoming, balance the fact that, there are changes that have to be made, ships that prove themselves to be broken, whether or not they've been broken for a long time, or whether or not a recent change in meta or some other ship has caused the broken aspect to come into light, like Dirk was talking about happened with Ishtars. They also have to, pay attention to, okay, if we have somebody new who's coming into the game and is skilling for these ships, we don't want to hit it so hard with the nerf bat that it becomes useless. And I think that's why you see them doing so incremental stuff like they did with the Ishtar, because it didn't really break the Ishtar as a fleet ship until much later. And in doing so, they didn't break it in all of its other roles too. I think you could have swung the nerf bat a lot harder at the Ishtar and solved the issue in one go. Whether or not it would have neutered it as a PvE boat, which it's a lot for, is an entirely different question. And I think that would have really caused a lot more uproar than the slower pace of balancing it underwent.
Well, one of the things that somebody's saying, Hexian saying out in the channel, is number one, he was talking about the skill injector market taking off because of people changing ships and doctrines all the time if they get around to, changing things too often or whatever. And he said, yeah, with the balancing team doing their job, stockpiles of doctrine ships will be a thing of the past. And and I think that one of the things that maybe people are confusing is when they say a dedicated balance team, that what they think is that is going to lead to more responsive balancing, as opposed to what other people think it will mean is it just won't be ad hoc groups that, okay, look, Rise and so you guys are on that this month, and next quarter it's Fozzie and somebody else, or Larrikin, or whatever, that this team, it will be their dedicated B. But it doesn't mean that they're going to be able to have their eye on every ship class all the time and be constantly responsive at that rate.
Honestly, you can't balance the game too fast. It's a complicated game. It takes a while for the meta to come out.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. I think there's two
unfortunately, guys, it's 11 at night. I got work in the morning, so.
It's all right, dude. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. I'll see y'all later.
Give us a quick shout out before you go.
Oh man, shout out to Ravens. They're underused. Trust me.
Yeah, I saw the post, Progon.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Have a good one, dude.
But the other thing that came up in that postcard, that video, was a refocusing on. Let me see if I have the quote here. No, I deleted it like I normally do. Anyways, basically, a sooner focus on combat and defense related to structures, that they're going to have a discussion about it at the upcoming Summer Summit, which I believe is going to be in the early part of August. And what it sounds as though they're potentially moving forward sooner on making changes that are related to structures out there than maybe what they were before. Did you guys hear that in it as well, or just paying lip service to acknowledging that there's an issue with structures?
Yeah, I mean, I got that a little bit. I think that with all these things that are they're doing PR wise, right? I mean, I think the real question comes down to is, you start managing and making decisions. I mean, that's kind of the point I was trying to make, right? is, there's too much waffling on things. Like the community gets pissed off something, and they CCP shits the bed for a month trying to figure out how to respond and react. That's got to stop.
Yeah. I mean, because, obviously one of the underlying issues that have been, lingering out there for a while because of how long this structure rollout is taking, right, is the issues of, well, I mean, she mentioned it, void bombs, taking a look at void bombs, as well as, the vulnerability windows and reinforcement timers associated with these things. And, there's a lot of people out there that believe that, the level of conflict that's going on, is kind of hampered by people waiting for this, these changes to finish. And if what we have to do is wait until all structures are out before they go and visit these things, then that could mean quite some time.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, one of the biggest changes to the meta is coming, right? The moon structures. I mean, how those actually, get rolled out is going to change, the meta completely, I think.
Oh, I can't wait for those new moon mining structures to come out. We're going to have so much fun with that shit.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a big change with how stuff's done. But to kind of walk back a bit to Dirk's point here about the the refocus on what they're doing with structures, I think that's going to see a change in the void bombs, definitely. As to how far they're going to go, I have no idea. But in addressing void bombs, I think they're also going to address something else that we could kind of get to with ship balancing, come out from that direction as well, which is the dominance of some sort of certain docks. And just to clear the air, yes, I am talking about the Macarial here. I know they're making some changes to the industrial side of things, but what do you guys think about how structures currently interact with ships and what constraints that puts on the meta versus what CCP has sort of done balance-wise to shift the meta? Were we just headed towards passive armor all along, or did void bombs really kind of force this change on their own?
Well, I mean, to some extent, armor has a dominant species out there to begin with, right?
Yeah, as far as big scale nullsec conflict is.
Yeah, exactly. Which is where I'm going to put it. When you're also talking about going up against a structure, right? A structure that lobs void bombs. I think certainly plays into that.
Yeah, hold on just a second. I've got somebody here who wants to tell me something.
Urs, what's your take on this? I ain't heard from you in a while.
I'm not surprised that they're finally addressing it after all the shit that's been going on the past few days.
Oh? Why don't you tell us a little bit more about this shit? Because I've been out of tune with things.
Well, you've heard about all the rage about this ghost training and things of that sort. So I think they finally got a wake up call and said, "Hey, maybe we ought to get our shit together."
One would think they'd have gotten that wake up call the first summer of Rage.
Well, yeah. No, I mean it's kind of once again, it's kind of hard to compare some of what's been going on recently. I mean, you can definitely draw some parallels to it, but these things are these things are going to happen where it builds up.
I mean, they're the same issues. I'll give Dirk that, but I mean, as far as the level goes, yeah. I mean, CCP learned their lesson the first time because they actually started balancing things. The Rifter wasn't, was the go-to low-level frigate for how many years? And they finally got around to making more of the frigates viable after the Summer of Rage when Crucible came out.
Yeah, so I remember that when I first started playing. So back in 2012 when I started, my boss at work was telling me about this awesome space game that He said it like this, and I quote him: "The gameplay is terrible, but the metagame is delicious." And he got me interested on that, and he said the best way to learn how to play is to fit up 1,000 rifters and lose them all. The rifter was fucking huge.
I do think that this video, only the first half of it, was a response to the discontent of recent events, but really not focusing on those kind of hot button momentary issues like ghost training and things like that, but focused on the underlying issues that people, especially, I want to say especially within the nullsec community, which tends to probably be the most vocal community in the game, we're concerned about. And I think that if they were planning on waiting until structures rolled out before they made adjustments to how structures are attacked or what level of vulnerability they had, and all of that, I think moving that forward, even if it's 3 months, 6 months earlier than what they had planned, will end up being a good thing in the long run. Because if you can pull some of those gripes out of it, maybe all of a sudden there's just more conflict going on over these structures.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
The analogy of the 1,000 rifters just made me think about how ridiculous some of the structure stuff is. You imagine, let's say goons, for example, decide to drop 1,000 Rotarus inside an enemy staging system. How do you balance that? How do you do anything about that? Honestly, you got 6-7 days of timers on 1,000 structures. There's really no way to deal with those.
Yeah, which is one of the things that people have been bringing up, right? This whole thing of structure spam and things like that. And one of the things that's been kind of rattling through my mind about this is, all these people that are either A, laying down all these structures, or B, planning on doing some sort of structure spam as a way of defending in a system. When they get around to, which I think that they will do, I think that they will get around to these things not being as tough a nut to crack as maybe what they are today. Those people with a lot of structures sitting around out there thinking, nobody's going to come and pull a 7-day grind on this for no good reason. May find themselves at I don't know, with a bunch of structures that are a 4-day grind. Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, it honestly may still be a 4-day grind, but
yeah, one of my favorite ideas I've seen so far was to have those vulnerable timers on anchoring structures that are past the 24-hour anchoring time. I think that would be a really nice thing to see.
Oh, so like you could, so you're talking when in hostile space, hostile here being defined as SOV, that anchoring things takes 7 days or whatever, but having the Vaughn windows show up during the anchoring timer so you could blow them up before they actually technically anchored?
Absolutely. That way the person who anchors it has to put in some effort.
Yeah, one thing I've thought that would be kind of interesting potentially would be, or no, let me back up here. What I've always run into in thinking about stuff like this is, well, how do you make it so you can limit the ability of large entities to do things here while not like completely neutering small entities from having anything special, or from getting caught in the crossfire and making these unviable for them. And one thing I thought that would be really interesting would be that things like Vaughn timers for a given system are determined by the largest class of structure in that system. So rather than have it be where, now you've got like that uniform 7-day timer or whatever, have it be something that's modified by the, or no, sorry, not the 7-day timer, the vulnerability windows. Have that be something that's determined on a system-wide basis, and whoever owns the largest structure in that system determines what the vulnerability window for that system is. Make it so if you are trying to invade somebody's space, you have to play in their Vaughn windows. The second thing I'd do in conjunction with this would be to make it so you have you know how currently on stations we have the ability to turn off services? Bring that same sort of thing to Citadels. Make it so having your Vaughn windows at a point where you have people around to defend it is something you want. So rather than being able to just bury your Vaughn windows in the middle of, no time zone when people are around, you instead have to balance when you place your Vaughn windows between when do I have people around to avoid my surfaces getting turned off, and when do I have either enough people or know enough of my enemies aren't going to be around to actually outright kill the structure. What do you guys think about that?
Well, on your first one, I think that would become a wallet war. And, if it's who has the largest structures, if one side forward to drop 50 Fortizars all time to come out at the same time, no matter what the other side does, no matter how good of a fleet commander, how good their fleet is, there's no way they're going to be able to take down. It's a astronomical number. Obviously, it's just for exaggerated number, but it'd be impossible for them to beat the wallet of the other side, even if the other side doesn't show up to fight. So I think that would be a dangerous path to go down in that way, just because it would come down to who can throw the most money at a non-battle, basically.
Warp drive active.
Fair enough.
Well, here's a good example. Let's say PL goes into a system, drops 100 Astra houses, and drops their super fleet in the system. What are you gonna do?
Cry. Really hard.
You're not gonna do anything. Even if you did deploy to try to kill them, what? You might be able to kill 20 of them, maybe.
Well, I think that just boils down to that there are enough entities in this game that if they really wanted you to die, there really isn't much you can do about it. So, somebody like PL showing up on the doorstep of, random non-aligned nullsec alliance number 295, I don't think there's anything that CCP can do from a balance perspective that's going to make random alliance number 295 stand a chance.
Which, if one side is actively on the field and people are actively doing things, I agree that's the way it should be. Even if, you're the victim of it, if there's an active component to it, I think it works. But when things can be passively won, I think is when it becomes dangerous. Somebody drops 1,000 Rataros and they're all coming out within a 20-minute time span. There's nothing you can do about that. It's going to happen. They're going to have, basically an unbeatable staging presence.
Warp drive active.
Yep.
Yeah, no disagreement here on that.
Anyways, since we're on the top... go ahead, Dirk. I'm sorry.
No, I was
going to change subject.
And then if you go into it, it has all of the, let's just say that you go into, downtown Delve, right? And there's just structure everywhere to where you've got to maneuver your fleet around them like a bunch of, cones that you're driving through. Do people want to go in there and do that kind of level of structure? But it doesn't really come down to structure grind sometimes, right? You can go into a place and it's more about, does the other side want to sit there and operate? Yeah, they may have a lot of structures there, and yes, eventually you may need to get to that, right? Does war really in this game kind of come down to, did you kill the other side's structures, or did you get the other side to give up ever showing up on the field?
I'd say it's definitely the latter. When you get to the point where an entity will stop attempting to engage at all, I think that's the point where you've won a war, or where you get an entity to say, you know what, we're moving.
Yeah,
at that point. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's the classic weaponized boredom. It may take 5 or 6 people on your side to accomplish something, putting a lot of hours in, but when you can deny 5,000, 10,000 people on the other side any kind of fun in order to defeat you, they're not going to bother.
Yeah, if you've got a group in your face that is just not going away and you can't beat them, you may have a ton of structures in that system, but unless your pilots are, enjoying themselves someplace else while nothing happens in that system other than, structures getting ground down maybe, it turns out to be not too fun for people who can't face off on the field.
And I mean, I think that sort of comes back to the disparity in group sizes. Like, there's a certain point where it just doesn't make any sense to throw away assets trying to drive somebody off.
Right, unless you feel that eventually you can counter the enemy that's there, right? I mean, granted, the whole asset safety thing brings some things that look. Asset safety kind of always existed in the game, right? I mean, if somebody flipped a station, all of the stuff in there was destroyed. You may not have access to it. Maybe you could fire sale it, whatever. Whereas here, it's well, as long as another sure exists in the system, right? It can be asset transferred over, or worst scenario. Well, we're not going to lose our stuff anyways. We're going to get taxed on it, but it's going to, end up in lowsec at some point.
Yeah, and I hear people like railing against asset safety all the time, like, "Oh, this is the single worst thing to ever happen to Eve." But you're right. You lose your assets before, and where asset safety, I think, has to remain intact in some form. I don't know if the current form is the correct way of doing it, but you need to be able to have people who are not involved in the game at time. They can't just lose all their stuff because if say I were to take a 6-month break from the game, and in that break time I'm completely disconnected, Delve gets run over, and there's no asset safety. Well, all my stuff is dead. At that point, it's like, well, why would I want to come back?
And that was one of the concerns when they first talked about destructible stations, right? Because the threat that was out there was, well, we're just going to go and burn down this region, because if nothing else, we get the tears out of the fact that it was all destroyed. But that's not really good for the game. I mean, ultimately, that's not good for the game. The question is asset safety too safe? And maybe it is right now. Maybe it is one of those things that once everything is said and done and the structures are laid out and they retire the old structures. So now, they've taken this time to allow player buy-in to the new structures to develop. And now we have gotten rid of the crutch of old structures. Maybe even that modifies itself to some extent to where there are more substantial loot drops or something along those lines. Dude.
Well, something that was just pointed out in chat, which is pretty interesting, somebody saying, the number of citadels should be capped in some way. This particular recommendation is for the number of moons, so it would be like pauses. The problem I see with that is you have in citadels something you couldn't have in pauses, in that you do get the ability to use them as stagers in some way, shape, or form. So no longer are you tied to, okay, if we are going to go after somebody, we need to find a space where we can put all of our stuff beforehand. Like, when the Imperium first went to take over Delve, after leaving the North, we staged in Soct because that was the closest NPC station, until such a time that we were able to, take space to set up a Fortizar, and then we eventually moved over there. I think if you make it so there's a limited number of citadels, the problem of not being invadable becomes worse, because now you're looking at, okay, say there's a cap of 20 upwell structures in a given system. Well, there are several systems, which I happen to be sitting in right now, which have already blown that cap away. So what do you do at that spot? Do you begin yanking structures out of space? Is it a per entity sort of thing? Like, hey, any given entity can only have that much in there? What sort of size entity would you be looking at? I don't see hard caps as the answer here. I think they introduce more problems than they solve.
Yeah, if you put a cap on it, literally within months, all of Delve and all of drones would be at the cap.
Yeah, exactly. Which in some ways harkens back to the old pause system, right? But the ability to go in there and lay siege to a single tower so you can get rid of it and then drop another tower immediately, existed. Whereas with kind of the way the current structures are set up, if you were to put down a similar cap to where it was based on moons or planets or whatever the hell it was, I don't know that it's set up to kind of allow for somebody to come in there and take out one structure so that they could, plop down their forward operating base.
Well, and not to mention, it's a Death Star didn't really put out the same kind of ass kicking to a cap that a borders are fit to kill cap, but it does.
So, since the concept of structure spam has been brought up, one of the big issues that people will cite is that, okay, well, one, there's damage caps, which I think that damage caps are an entirely different argument that we could have. But another thing is that they have those 15-minute timers. What would you guys think about, for the purpose of clearing space of uncontested structure? So a scenario where you have defeated the entity in question in the field, either by them showing up and you annihilating their force, or them just choosing not to show up on the field at all. What would you guys think about giving dreads a third type of siege module, not just the Tech 1s and Tech 2s, one that lasts for 15 minutes and effectively makes the dreads able to kill us, to hit the damage cap on a citadel on their own at that point in time? Basically making it so you can just say, okay, I'm going to drop a singular dread on this citadel that I know they're not going to come contest, and boom, I can just kill it.
Well, doesn't that take away the whole point of the damage caps? Was because if I remember the original intent, it was to prevent an overwhelming force from having absolutely no fights at all when they come in and invade, because the other side would never be willing to put up a fight because they know it's overwhelming. And with the damage caps, the other side, they're going to be on the field for a certain amount of time, and they would actually go fight them, have a chance. But if you have this now split thing where they can still bring a fleet to wipe out the other fleet, plus now they can wipe out the citadel in 5 minutes or so, the defending side no longer has that impetus. They no longer have that, okay, we're going to show up because we might be able to beat them if we can drag this out long enough.
Fair point.
Just my opinion. I'm not saying you're wrong.
It's like I just think that would remove my intent would be that this module would have penalties to it to where it would not make sense to use in an actual fleet engagement. This would be, okay, I found, random Astra house that's not ours. The people who lived in it are no longer around. I just want to kill it. Just giving one person the ability to kind of eliminate something in that particular vein of things. So say, for instance, like,
I've got it. I know how to solve this problem. Make it so that this siege module that you put on the Dreadnought only works on targets that have no fuel.
Or, secondary thought here, what if it were to work like polarized weapons?
Ooh.
To where it nukes your resist to 0. Making it something that you just don't put on the field in a contested environment.
Siege weapon polarization module. That's actually pretty fucking sexy.
Well, I think it's pretty good, pretty good idea. But the problem is somebody would figure out a way to abuse it in multiple ways. I mean, if you had a multi-boxer of 20 dreads, right? You set up, and you could literally reinforce 20 citadels, in 15 minutes. One dude.
And again, in a situation where things are uncontested, because, okay, so I'm throwing things out here that would address issues. So say this particular module increases damage against upwell structures by, a large enough amount that they're going to hit the DPS cap. It nukes your resists, and it gives you say a 99% penalty to damage against ships. So it's just something that is not viable in a combat situation at all, through whatever means. At what point does somebody being able to do exactly what you describe in terms of bringing out a bunch of multi-boxers to get rid of a bunch of citadels at once, is that really a problem? If they're doing it in such a way that it has to be uncontested? Because if you're not contesting it already, we've already passed the point where contesting can happen.
Well, I honestly, I think the other idea was a really good one. The running out of fuel, reducing the ability of the structure to be defended, significantly to the point where it's basically a pushover, because that goes back to what I was talking about earlier with the activity.
Set the damage cap to a fueled ability.
Yeah, so because again, it's activity versus inactivity. Right now, inactivity is winning. A citadel that's out of fuel is just as much of a problem to somebody as a citadel that has fuel. There's no difference, and thus inactivity is still as big a problem as activity to a defender, an offender, whoever's working the system at that time. Make it so that inactivity has problems. Make it so that it's no longer a strength. Make it a weakness.
That I actually really like in terms of turning the.
Yeah.
You could also extend it to the ref timers as well. Basically, if a Citadel is, if you have, or so you put another service on a Citadel that's like combat or combat and ref or whatever, and if that particular thing runs out of fuel, then you no longer have a ref timer, you no longer have a damage cap, you no longer have any active weapons.
Well, it could lead to some really interesting, gameplay as well. But I think the problem is for the big, well put together groups, that's just another check on the check box for your Citadel management, right? For a smaller group, it sucks a lot more for a smaller group than a larger group, is what I'm trying to say.
Which I think is something you're going to run into no matter what. Yeah.
Okay. So let's combine some things. To reduce Citadel spam, we put a cap on number of upwell structures in the system. We'll make it unique to each system. I like the idea of placing it as the number of moons in a system. And we'll combine that with the fact that if a Citadel structure is unfueled, it has no damage cap, it has no ref timers, you can just basically blow it up whenever the fuck you want. That way, there's a limit to number of Citadels in a system, and if somebody's no longer living in a system, it's very easy to clean it up.
See, I'm also a big fan. Oh, go ahead.
I think the caps are a fundamental problem with this, though, because, again, going back to the argument that you can use these things as stagers, that's something that POSes couldn't do. I really think it made sense to limit POSes to moons because of what POSes could do and what they were, what they could do within the game, and the limits that kind of already existed on where you'd want to use them. It made sense to have a limited number. With upwell structures, I don't think that makes sense, just because they are something where you don't necessarily only need a fixed number. So to take this to POSes here, so say I'm setting up something under Dominion, so POSes aren't necessary to control SOV, just like Citadels aren't necessary to control quote unquote SOV right now. So, I go into a system, it's got, say, an R64, an R32, hodgepodge of other moons, and that's kind of it. So I, as the owning entity, I want the R64. I maybe want the R32, depending on the amount of effort I'm going to put in. And I need one system, or I need one of those moons to anchor a jump bridge POS on. That's 3. Those are 3 structures I, as the owning entity, need in that system. The other ones can be open for private exploitation. I can just... Oh, sorry. They're open for private exploitation. I can just put a POS on them just to have something there so nobody can. Sure, somebody can come in and blow it up, but that's something that can happen in the course of a day, day and a half, 2 days. So not this long drawn-out timer right now. So here, let me approach the cap from a different angle, because I just give myself an idea. What if the cap applied to structures that went through the ref mechanics as they exist now? Everything else is just, you can go through it. So the cap only exists up to number of moons or whatever, but then anything else doesn't have any sort of ref timer.
Yeah, see, I don't know if they can actually do that, though, because I think the mechanics tied to them are the same for engineering complexes, Citadels, and then the moon mining platforms. And of course, the moon mining platforms, you're going to want one on each moon potentially. So,
that's a really good point that I did not think of.
Even my idea I just had there, it just doesn't. Caps just will become more of a problem than they would be a solution, because then you eliminate the ability to put a stager somewhere. And we saw what trying to put stagers in a place did to force a major fight. If you know it's coming, there will be a big fight over it. F4R2.
Well, I think there was a major fight over a Fortizar here recently, wasn't there?
Yeah, it's like I think that forward deployment of stagers is a place where the new big fights are going to be over. I think that's one thing that's going to replace these. Oh, you have to go after a POS, or you're fighting over an iHub or whatever. I think staging Citadels are going to be one of those new fight areas. So I think eliminating the ability for that to happen is basically blowing off their own foot with regards to content creation.
Well,
and it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier about having the vuln cycles during those placements of those staging citadels. It has to be a focus on activity. There cannot be a focus on inactive content in this game as the primary goal of everything that's in the development cycles.
So yeah, I think probably the best thing for spam, or to fix the spam thing, is to probably add some sort of fuel timer, because I know what you're getting at there, Jay, with the whole, well, it creates more problems for smaller entities than it does for large ones, but I don't see small entities being able to spam enough structures that it becomes a problem in the same way large entities can. So it's not like you're going to have some guy from a, say, 200-300 man corp, 200-300 man alliance, going around and going, hey, I have 60 citadels to fuel. No, he's probably going to have more around like 20 that may need to have their combat capabilities like always active, and you can go fill the rest of them if you're being invaded.
Yeah, I mean, here's the one thing we haven't seen though, I think, and I think is maybe what CCP has been waiting for, is really seeing Keepstars use offensively, right? I go down to XYZ Alliance's space, I drop a Keepstar in their space and start saging my super fleet, out of that space and start attacking them, or have a super cache in that Keepstar, right?
Well,
I think...
I want to say to some extent we haven't seen forward staging of, say, a Keepstar, right? Because I don't know that we've had a conflict there yet that would really warrant somebody bothering to go to that extent, right?
No, I'm not going to say. Well, what I'm saying, there are some groups that I'll name in the game that could do something really, really nasty, right? They could say, hop into a region, drop a Keepstar, drop a bunch of Fortizars around that Keepstar, and install a super fleet, right? Secure the region, move on to the next region, and rinse repeat. And they'd be effectively be able to project over 10, 20, 30 regions.
Well, I think there you get into the limits on force projection that currently exist in game. With jump fatigue and all that. Yes, I'll bring jump fatigue into the conversation.
No, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm talking about. Yeah, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about. I put a Keepstar in a region, right? I stash 1,000 supers in there, right? And then I do it to the next one. All I have to do is jump below my super pilots around.
Thanks for the follow.
With any issues, and that's a big issue if you have max skills.
Which I think if you get an entity that's that large in the game that could manage to continually pull that off, then I think the game is well and truly dead.
Well, with the amount of output, being done in this game across, I'm not talking about Dell, I'm talking about the entire game. It's getting there. I mean, when you have, thousands of supers being built in the game every month and dozens of Keepstars, I think it's coming.
Well, there's also the aspect of, and they gotta want to do that, right? Which has been that whole want thing, the why do we want to go after your space sort of thing, seems to have been lacking a bit here for a while.
Well, I think once,
which none of this stuff changes, right? None of their solutions with vulnerability windows. It may lower the bar a little bit to, well, why do we want to go do it? Well, because it'll be easier now than what it was before. But there's still that whole thing of, why are we going to go and do structure grinding as opposed to, well, we're going to go hit your structure in order to draw you out for a good fight.
Well, let me give you an example. Let's say, I'm Imperium and Tarkinius is Phoenix Federation, right? You mind if I give an example here, Tark?
Feel free.
So let's say I go into Phoenix Federation space and, I friggin' drop a Keepstar, right? And I know they have XYZ amount of supers. I have, and I just decide, okay, I'm gonna stage double that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to extort them. They're going to pay me their moons. They're going to pay me whatever, right? And what am I going to do about it as a group? And it's, how do you deal with that? and then I can jump back to my home region and do whatever I want. And if the payments don't come, I jump back in. I've got my super cash sitting there, and I start raining hell on moon mining platforms or whatever, right?
I mean, like I said, I just think that scenario is one that is so out there in terms of what it would take to get to that point where that becomes something that happens. I just don't see that being a thing that occurs, just because the sheer amount of people you would need to pull that off, to be able to threaten multiple groups in that manner, is just huge. I don't see the game having enough individuals to do that without also hitting the point that we start running into scarcity of space, and then there being conflict because of that. I just don't see those two things existing side by side.
Is this what somebody was referring to before the show, just in an offhand way, Viceroy 2.0?
Yeah.
Okay. Because now I've put together that side comment from earlier.
But I mean, they could do it. I mean, the Imperium could do it, right? And there's other groups that could do it as well. And I mean, it doesn't have to be 20 regions. It could be 5 regions, right? It could be 2 regions. And it's not about being able to actually project that force. It's the threat, right? It's simply the keep stars there. The supers are there. They've dropped them on you multiple times, and they don't have to do it again. And they do it, then they pacify another region.
Yeah, like I said, I just don't see the number of people necessary to make that a viable threat, and the current lack of scarcity of space that's allowing these numbers to come up in this fashion that you're talking about. I don't see those two things existing side by side.
What I'm saying is that every single time something like this, is broken, right? The big groups out there push it past the point of breaking, and that's just an example of how you could do that. I mean, you could pop into a region, drop 100, 200 Astra houses, 24 Desires and Star, and you've got staging for months. There's no way they can get rid of you.
Well, to change the topic related to structures, I know we're still waiting eagerly for some of the changes post the moon mining. How would you guys like to see, in your own minds, the replacement for the last legacy POS stuff, the jammers, the beacons, jump bridges? How would you guys like to see those come out?
Well, that's the question, right? Are they going to somehow be their own their own structures, or are they going to be something that is tied to one of the existing structures that come out, right?
Well, from what I heard, there was to be because after the moon stuff, there's supposed to be the next batch of SOV stuff, right? The SOV upgrades, the SOV revamp, the array, and all that kind of crap. So I imagine it'd probably be on the array.
Yeah, because I'm thinking back, to their very first ideas that they had, in I think 3 fan fests ago, when they laid out the plans. Maybe it's 2 fan fests ago, where they laid out the plans for the structure changes, and they were talking about some of the structures that, the hypothetical may never arrive. But they're talking about, instead of jump beacons or jump bridges, they'd be able to let you point your gates for people that are blue or in your alliance. They would go to different destinations than neutral groups or red groups that would, follow the old paths for the gates. Stuff like that I always thought was an interesting vision by CCP. Obviously we haven't heard anything since then, but just what your take on something like that would be, or just what your vision would be for replacements.
I can just imagine the absolute rage amongst many if the structure that replaces Sino beacons has tethering.
I was just going to say that. You know that they can't put the Sino beacon on something that has tethering, right? I mean, that would just be insanity.
That wouldn't be abused at all.
Like, I could almost see, I could see the SOV stuff and, Sino jammers getting rolled onto the same structure, and then I could see Sino beacons and gate and jump bridges getting rolled into the same structure, the latter not having tethering.
Right.
Well, wasn't it supposed to? Aren't there supposed to be these arrays that are supposed to be coming out where you can, get rid of local or, the clunky camper craft and all that they talked about like 2 years ago?
The information arrays or whatever the hell they
observation.
were.
Yeah, I think it's observation arrays.
Yeah, I mean, those were ones that I think that were that were hypothetical. I don't know that they ever mentioned, how those would be relative to, I don't think they've really ever mentioned the whole thing of the Sino beacon, Sino jammer. Some people have speculated that the supposed player-built Stargate thing will somehow be tied to jump bridges, and maybe it will. Maybe the medium version of that will be the replacement for the jump bridge, and then whatever the thing is that shoots people off cannon style into new space, will be a large structure of some sort.
That could really make things up if they blew up all the gates and we had to build new gates.
One thing I remember from back at the start that just recently, I'd say in the last 6 months, I saw it kind of an offhanded comment from one of the CCP members was the administrative array, which I'd completely forgotten about until I heard it again, where it's basically the bottom up taxation of activities inside a system directly to an alliance owner of the system. That was something that I completely forgot about. It just popped up in a conversation with one of the CCP members, so I think that's still on the table. I could be wrong, but it seems like it's still there.
But that's the scary thing about about how long the whole structure thing is taking, right? Is the fact that even once we get the moon stuff, which is winter, which could be generally anywhere from, let's say, late November until I don't know, the day before FanFest or some shit, that we still have not talked about, kind of the timing of these other structures that are on pauses, which just pushes out that whole stations and pauses going away until God knows when.
Well, stations are dying soon. But yeah, I think, like pauses, I think at some point they're just going to have to bite the bullet and say, you know what, we're going to introduce these missing things as modules for existing upwell structures. And they're going to get something that becomes bonus to them later. Much like we saw with the introduction of Citadels initially with the refining arrays, and now they're losing that bonus and it's going to be moved over to these moon structures. I'd almost wonder if that's going to happen at some point in the next calendar, at some point in 2018, and we'll see the dedicated structures for them come into play later.
Well, I think also the thing that Dirk was hitting on is, let's say the moon changes do come out in winter. I mean, God, it's going to be, if anything else is to go by, 3-4 months until they're functional. And then we're into next year. And, you know what I'm saying? Like, the delays are, it could be end of next year before anything really finishes, as far as the structures go.
Well, I mean,
one thing that may be
ECs were the last.
Okay.
I'm sorry, yeah, but ECs were the last things that come out, right? And when did those debut? Was that tail end of last year?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and and then the next ones are the moon stuff, which is sometime let's just call it tail end of. That's a long time in between, from one structure to the next, right? I mean.
Well, one positive we have for the follow-on structures is a lot of the functionality that they'll have is something that's already in place. With the moon structures, they had to create a whole new functionality for it. They had to design an active system out of an inactive system. They had to go from base concept all the way through design. Whereas, a jump bridge or whatever form of a jump bridge is going to exist afterwards, that exists in the game in about 20 different forms between gates and jump bridges and Sino beacons and jumps on Titans and capital ships. So I think the process to get those into the game, as long as they keep it similar to what already exists in functionality, should just be asset design and implementation rather than having create this whole new idea and then bring that about.
And I think part of the reason why you see the moon mining structures coming before all these other things, which again, Tark, you're completely right. They do have, the proverbial blueprint for how those are going to work already all laid out. There's no big changes. I think with moon mining, you're seeing the one thing that POSes do that isn't replicated anywhere else. Like, yeah, Sino beacons are something you can only anchor on POSes, but you have Sinos you can light on ships. You have jump bridges. Again, these exist on Titans effectively. It's the same sort of thing. So this is really eliminating the one thing that POSes, the one remaining thing that POSes and only POSes could do. From that point, you've then gotten to kind of the area where you could reasonably introduce everything else as modules, nuke POSes out of the game, and then bring in the other structures that are going to allow you to have like a dedicated jump bridge or a dedicated Sino jammer or whatever it is else they end up putting in.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing that kind of worries me being a miner, though, is there isn't a viable, replacement to mining into a boss, right, as of yet. Because you still have the session change of going into a citadel versus, dumping into a compression array or whatever. And I mean, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but for the multi-boxers out there, I mean, doing 50 session changes, if that's how you're doing it, or, it's just, that could be a real pain in the butt.
Well, if you're multi-boxing, then you should have a fucking Rorqual out there with a compression array in it.
Yeah, some groups don't put Rorquals on field.
Well, then those groups shouldn't be multi-boxing.
Yeah, like I guess in that particular... I guess in that particular argument, like I understand where it's coming from, but at the same time, I think you do have the solution already. It's if you don't want to deal with session timers, use a Rorqual. You're not in an area that's safe enough to use a Rorqual, deal with session timers or do something else. Like, I think there's already the solution in there. I don't think it's something they need to provide that doesn't already exist.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting. And yes, I fully recognize that moon mining took longer to develop. And therefore, there was a bigger gap in between when ECs were released and eventually when the refineries come out. We had Citadels in April of 2016, and then it was later in the year that the ECs came out, and then there's this long gap in between this brand new thing that they needed to like completely build from the ground up. So hopefully whatever the next step is will be able to come sooner rather than later, right?
Well, I also think you have part of that gap is also iterating a lot on what these structures can do. Like within the gap between ECs coming out and what will eventually be the refineries release, we got insurance and citadels. We got all these other things. So I don't think you can attribute the gap entirely to just moon mining taking longer, but more that they were trying to get the structures to a point where when moons come out, they can also do the swap over to station, or the station swap, where outposts and conquerable stations are going away. So I think that is going to be where you really see kind of the culmination of changes this year, is not only the release of moon mining structures, but also the removal of Fozzie-Sov components, or Intosisov, whatever we want to call it, from like the stager or the place where you live is going away from the Sov system and becoming something that's all up well. Yeah, that's a big change.
Yep, no doubt. Well, I mean, this entire thing has been, has been a huge change. You remember back to when, the thing was basically we wanted a replacement for pauses, right? It was like, we need more functionality than these things and whatnot. But the pause code was so old that there just was no, there was no fixing them, right? Now, little did we know that what that would turn into would be a multi-year complete rebuilding of of structures across EVE.
Well, I mean, I think anybody who's been involved with like dev stuff probably realized that this was going to be a multi-year process. I'm not sure the player base realized that, but I think there are a lot of things the player base doesn't really realize very well.
I think part of the reason they didn't realize it is CCP needs to work a little bit better on setting expectations, communicating, and engaging with their customer base. But
yeah.
Well, at the same time, I agree. There could be better communication, but I think you also there run into the danger of, we've said this is going to be happening at this point in time, but we've run into a reason that this can't happen.
Which is where communication comes into it. Which is where communication comes into account.
Which again, you're not wrong. I'm just saying, you see how viciously the community can react to things that are taking too long to fix. Well, what if something takes too long to make? Say they promised, because I think there was original something on updates.eveonline.com which had moon mining coming out in the summer, so it would be like
fall.
Now.
It was fall.
Yeah, it was an earlier time, and I want to say it was significantly earlier too. I want to say it was summer, and then it got moved to fall, and then it got moved to winter.
At one point, there was a timeline showing beginning of August.
Yeah, so at any rate, that got changed very quietly because it wasn't something that was like firmly set in stone. Like they hadn't committed to it beyond having it be something that, hey, this is kind of coming in the future, and then it got moved to the further future. I can just see it being something where if they were to say, yeah, this is totally going to be, this plays out on the roadmap, and then they run into, issues like they clearly have here with making things work correctly or needing to kind of readjust priorities, people going, well, why isn't this structure here? You said it was going to be here a year and a half ago. Why is it not releasing on the date you told us it is?
Yeah,
because number one, there should have been some communication between a year and a half ago and now.
Exactly, that's the fucking point. It goes a year and a half without a fucking word. So yeah, the community's going to shred you. They're hiding their heads in the sand. I mean, it's yeah, they can say whatever, but the point is they're not engaging with the customer base until the shit hits the fan, and then they react, and so on and so forth. If they were communicating properly on an ongoing basis, right? You can overcome a lot of these hurdles from a delay perspective or whatever. I mean, anybody who's been in a service-based business knows this, that you can provide perfect service and not communicate with your customer and have your customer fucking fire you. You can provide shit service, communicate your ass off, engage with them, and most likely retain the customer. So, I mean, they disconnect from their player base for a year and a half about structures, and then wonder why everyone's pissed off that it's taken longer because, well, they didn't communicate with their customer.
And that was kind of one of the things that we used to talk about quite a bit in terms of their ability to manage player expectations, right? It was one of the things that led to the massive disappointment with Incarna. There have been other things along the way. I'll say, right, player-built Stargates. 2014 FanFest, I believe, is when that got
13, wasn't it?
13, maybe 13, but I think it was 14. But the point is that one of the things that we've said for a long time is check your player expectations, because you don't want to give them something that sounds so hypey at your big event during the year that you pretty much know you're not going to be able to follow through on for 3 years.
It's like why we're never going to see Half-Life 3. The expectation for it is so high, Valve could never deliver on it. You don't want to put yourself in a Half-Life 3 situation.
Boy, Half-Life has died, 12 times now?
And these are and the thing about communication, because you can take it on a number of things. I mean, look, the ghost training thing, right? That right there ultimately came down to the way in which they chose to manage the communication of acknowledging it. I mean, bugs are going to happen, right? Exploits are going to happen. It's all a matter of, if you leave it up to your player base to be able to say that you were silent about it because either you didn't know about it, or because you weren't working on it, or because you don't want to leave those variables out there for them. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to give out more information and not just about exploits, but about any of this stuff than what's necessary, other than letting them know that, hey, checkpoint, here's a checkpoint. Maybe time for a little bit of an update here, because this is a long process that we're dealing with. Let us tell you where we are in the process right now, and kind of recalibrate some expectations.
Yeah, if they did that like every quarter, they would head off a lot of this animosity before it got started.
Now, where we could be right now, okay, because we've got Eve Vegas coming up, right? We've got Eve Vegas coming up in October. We already know that at some time during the winter, the expectation is for these refineries and the new moon mining, right? For all we know, at Eve Vegas, the unveil could be. Oh, and by the way, when those come out, so's the thing for Sinos and Sinojammers, and right? I mean, like theoretically, that is possible. And it would be like a surprise that everybody would sit there and go, fuck yeah!
Basically, hi, we're eliminating everything POSes could ever do and POSes in the next update.
Right, and now that would completely reverse the expectation that's out there, because the expectation that's out there right now is, holy shit, we're probably this time next year still talking about replacement structures for what already exists.
And like I said, that's why I think they're going to go the module route first. I think it's going to be a module,
which could totally make sense as far as putting replacing the functionality, right? Maybe not having it be all things to all people right off the bat, but at least the functionality gets changed. So therefore, you can move, removing the crutches of the old stuff.
Yeah, because I could see that happening with them then being able to say, okay, now that we don't have to worry about, there being a comparison with POSes, now is the point where we can really go in and hit void bombs with the Nerf bat. We can touch reinforcement timers and change how that works. Because then that eliminates the big concern of, well, POSes don't work this way. Like, I can see somebody coming out and saying that at some point, going, well, POSes don't work this way. Really trying to be as snobbish as possible when I'm saying that.
Yeah. Well, I actually did that with the first round of ECs, because the bonuses were non-existent. The initial round of bonuses, it didn't have the hull bonuses on it. You had to rig it. And the rigs were, especially the smaller ones, they're granular as shit. Still are.
Warp drive active.
What else do we have on the board out there? I don't know. Either to talk about or I'm trying to think of what else has come up recently that.
Well, you bring that up, and the next thing I want to talk about is shoutouts, because we're actually hitting that 2-hour mark.
Yeah.
So with shoutouts, we always work from the bottom up. That's going to be yours.
Shout out to guys in the Ministry of Love, separating idiots from their freighters since 2010. Well, roughly 2010.
Docking permission requested.
Next.
Docking request accepted.
Let's see. I guess shout out to my folks in FCON and Phoenix Federation. Couldn't be more proud of them. And then I guess just a very bland generic one. Shout out to anybody that makes this game fun and works in that goal instead of the other way around. It's Eve won't be here if everyone's out to make it shitty for everyone else.
I guess shout out to anybody from Karma Fleet who's listening. As Tarkanius was talking about, there are people in this game who make it great. You guys are all awesome, especially the leadership team. You guys make things happen that are fun all the time.
Jay?
Yeah, I always go last. You're up next, Jay.
Shout out to Lady. She couldn't be here. She took care of some real life stuff, but Hope she's here next week.
I look forward to seeing him. Dirk?
I don't know. I'm always freaking terrible with shout outs. I don't know. Shout out to the people that are going to be participating in the Alliance tournament, which is up in, like 14 days or something like that. It's coming up. It's coming up pretty soon. So I know there's a lot of teams out there that are involved with that. And I guess also shout out to 1 week from tonight is the start of Game of Thrones season. So yeah, there's that.
Oh, now I have to add another thing to do on a busy Sunday. All right, well, for my shout-outs, I want to give, first off, a huge shout-out to Jay here. This motherfucker's a hero. I didn't think I was going to have a show this week. And then he just shows up and is like, hey, I got all these people. I'm like, yes! Also, a big shout-out to Just Let It Happen Alliance. We are still alive. We only have 3 corps remaining, but we're still alive. I don't know what we're doing as far as recruiting other corps. I still have to talk to my Alliance leadership about that, which is why I'm not pimping that out quite yet. I also want to give a shout out to everybody who showed up. This is not a show without guests. Trust me. I've tried that by myself once. It was 20 minutes of recording, 5 minutes of actual sound, and no minutes of interesting content. Yes, Herderker, I am with Just Let It Happen Alliance. F you, mate. Yay, yay. In any case, I do want to thank everybody for coming here. I want to thank everybody in the Twitch audience for watching live. I also want to give a shout out to the Nanooks who helped me get another 60 million ISK by allowing me to loot his wreck because I blew him up. Thanks a bunch, Nanook. You just replaced one of the 2 worms I lost today. With that said, I do want to thank everybody for showing, for Jay, Dirk, Robbie, Tark, Urziel, ProGod, and myself. This is Manny Bothans reminding you that Manny Bothans died to bring you this broadcast. Fortunately, his medical clone was somewhere nearby.